Welcome to Heartfelt Revenge Stories. My name is Sarah Collins, and I am 28 years old. 3 hours ago, my own mother grabbed my wrist inside a lawyer's office and whispered into my ear that if I received a single penny from my grandmother's will, she would make my life a living hell. And the terrifying part? She meant every single word. Please subscribe and like this video and listen to my story till the end and let me know which city you're listening from. That way, I can see how far my story has traveled. The lawyer read 5 pages. The house, the savings, the jewelry, every last thing my grandmother had worked her entire life to build. All of it went to my mother. She sat there smiling like she had already won a war I didn't even know I was fighting. And then the lawyer cleared his throat and said there was an amendment, filed just 3 days before my grandmother died. And I watched every trace of color drain from my mother's face like water leaving a bathtub. But before I tell you what happened in that room, I need to take you back. 6 months back. To the last phone call I ever received from my Grandma Rose. It was a Tuesday evening in September. I was sitting at my kitchen table grading spelling tests, the kind with the little gold star stickers I always kept in a jar by my pencil cup. I teach 2nd grade at Millfield Elementary, and on this particular night, I was halfway through a stack of papers when my phone lit up on the table. Grandma Rose. I picked up before the second ring. I always did. Grandma? Her voice came through the line, thin and careful. Not the warm, full voice that used to call me in from her backyard when I was little. Not the voice that read me stories on the porch swing until my eyes got heavy. Something underneath it sounded hollow, like a bell with a crack running through it. Sarabine, she said. That was her name for me. Sarabine. She'd been calling me that since I was 4 years old and told her I wanted to live inside a bean plant like a fairy. Grandma, are you okay? I'm fine, sweetheart. Listen to me. There was a pause. I could hear her breathing, slow and deliberate, like each breath was something she was rationing. I need you to remember something. No matter what happens, I've taken care of it. I set down my red pen. Taking care of what? Just remember. Promise me you'll remember. I promise, but Grandma, what are you talking about? Tell me what's happening. And just like that, she changed the subject entirely. Tell me about your kids, she said. The little ones at school. Is that boy still drawing horses on everything? Haha, yes, I told her. His name is Marcus, and last week he drew a horse on his math worksheet right across the long division. She laughed. It was small, but it was real, and I held on to that sound. That was Grandma Rose for you. The woman who raised me more than my own mother ever did. She was there every single afternoon to pick me up from school while my mother was out networking or lunching or doing whatever it was that always seemed to matter more than I did. Grandma Rose taught me to make pie crust from scratch, and let me get flour on absolutely everything without a single word of complaint. She read me Charlotte's Web 4 times in one summer, and every single time Charlotte died, we both cried together on the couch under the same quilt. And every time my mother made me feel small, every time I came home from school with something to be proud of and my mother barely looked up from her phone, Grandma Rose would put me on her porch swing and say, "You have more spine than you think, Sarabine." We talked for 11 minutes that September night. She asked about my students, my apartment, whether I was eating enough vegetables because she always worried I survived on coffee and crackers. Normal things. Warm things. But her voice never came back to full strength, and she never explained what she meant by "I've taken care of it." The next morning I called her back. The phone rang twice. My mother picked up. "Mom," I said, confused. "I'm calling for Grandma. She's resting. Don't call this number again." The line went dead. Over the next week I called 11 times. I kept a tally on a sticky note by my kitchen phone like some kind of sad little scoreboard. 3 times the call went straight to voicemail. Twice my mother picked up and immediately hung up without a single word. The rest just rang and rang and rang until they clicked over to silence. On day 8, I drove 40 minutes to Grandma's house on Sycamore Street. The porch light was off, which stopped me cold the moment I pulled up to the curb. Grandma Rose always kept that porch light on until 10 every night. Always. It was one of her rules, like taking your shoes off at the door and never going to bed with dishes in the sink. I knocked. Nothing. I knocked harder. The door finally opened, but it wasn't Grandma standing in the frame. It was Doug, my stepfather. He filled the whole doorway with his arms crossed, still wearing his work boots inside the house, which Grandma would absolutely never allow. She would have looked at those boots and said, "Douglas, those stay at the door," and he would have grumbled and obeyed. Your mother said no visitors, he said. Elaine needs rest and not drama. She's my grandmother, Doug. I just want to see her for 5 minutes. Don't make this harder than it needs to be, Sarah. And he closed the door in my face. I stood on that porch and listened to the lock click into place, and I just stood there. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I stood there like a person who had just been told in the clearest possible way that they do not belong. The next day I reached out to Mrs. Gallagher, Grandma's neighbor of 30 years, the woman who used to bring over zucchini bread every August without fail. She sounded genuinely confused on the phone. Oh honey, Carol told us Rose had moved to a care facility up in Ridgewood. But that can't be right. It couldn't be right because I had stood on that porch, and when I looked up at Grandma's bedroom window on my way back to my car, I could see the lamp on. The one with the yellow shade she had owned since before I was born. She was in that house. She was 15 feet from where I stood, and my mother had locked the door between us and then told the neighbors she had moved away. That was the moment something shifted inside me. A cold, clear shift like a window opening in winter. My mother wasn't taking care of Grandma Rose. My mother was keeping her. And she was making absolutely sure I couldn't get close enough to find out why. Stay with me, because what happens in that lawyer's office is something I still can't fully believe even though I lived it. Part 2 is coming, and trust me, the truth gets so much heavier before it gets lighter. 3 months passed. 91 days. And I did not see my grandmother once. Every Sunday I sat down at my little kitchen table, and I wrote her a card. Short things, simple things. How my students were doing. What the weather was like outside. That I had tried to make her peach cobbler recipe, and burned the top so badly that my smoke alarm went off twice and my neighbor knocked on the wall. Oh, I bet she would have laughed at that. I mailed every single card to Sycamore Street and had absolutely no way of knowing if she ever held them in her hands. My mother called me exactly once during those 91 days. Not to tell me how Grandma's health was. Not to ask how I was holding up. Just this, delivered in the flat, efficient tone she used for grocery lists and dentist reminders. Mom's changing her estate plan. It's what she wants. Don't make a scene. I gripped my phone so hard my knuckles ached. What do you mean changing it? It means it's handled, Sarah. It means you should focus on your little teaching job and let the adults manage things. My little teaching job. I make $34,000 a year standing in front of 22nd graders every morning trying to teach them that the world is worth knowing. And my mother said my little teaching job like she was describing a hobby I had picked up. I looked into hiring an elder law attorney. The retainer alone would have cost me 3 months of rent. I had no proof of anything except a locked door, a disconnected phone call, and a neighbor who had been lied to. I was completely powerless, and my mother knew it down to her bones. Then one Tuesday night in late November, just after I had turned off my bedside lamp and pulled the quilt up to my chin, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. Unknown number. I almost didn't open it, but I did. 4 lines. That was all. Your grandmother is in hospice now. She asks about you every day. I'm sorry I can't say more. Please don't give up on her. No name. No explanation. Just someone reaching through a crack in the wall my mother had built. I read that message 7 times. I screenshot it and sent it to myself just to make sure it was real. Then I pressed my phone against my chest in the dark, and I just lay there with my heart hammering. Because someone out there knew the truth. Someone was watching. Someone cared enough to risk sending that message. But who? I sat on the floor of my apartment that night with my back against the wall, and a shoebox of old photographs open in my lap. There was one from my 8th birthday. Grandma Rose and me, both of us leaning over a cake with our cheeks puffed out, blowing out the candles together, her arm tight around my shoulders. Both of us absolutely losing it laughing. My mother wasn't in the frame. I don't think she was even in the room. I started doing the math in my head. Not money math. Loss math. If I stayed quiet, I would lose the chance to say goodbye to the only person who ever truly fought for me. I would lose every photograph, every journal, every piece of jewelry she had ever pressed into my hands and said, "Someday this is yours." I would lose the house on Sycamore Street where I learned what love was actually supposed to feel like. But worse than all of that, I would lose myself. Because this was the pattern. I had been watching it my entire life and choosing silence every single time. When I was 18, Grandma Rose gave me her old Buick so I could drive to college. My mother sold it within a month. Said it was an eyesore in the driveway. I said nothing. When my mother told her friends at church that I was ungrateful and distant and difficult, I said nothing. When she forgot my college graduation entirely, didn't show up, didn't call, didn't send so much as a text, I said nothing. 28 years of nothing. And if I stayed quiet now, my grandmother would die believing I hadn't cared enough to push back. She would die thinking I had let her go. I didn't sleep that night. Not a single hour. But by morning I had something. Not a great plan, but a plan. Years ago, Grandma had added me as a secondary contact on her insurance policy. I remember because she had made me write the policy number on an index card in her kitchen, pressing it into my hand and saying, "Keep this somewhere safe, Sarah Bean, just in case." At the time I thought she was being dramatic. Now I understood she had been thinking 10 steps ahead. While I was still learning the rules of the game, I called the insurance company. After 40 minutes on hold listening to the same 4 bars of piano music on loop, a kind woman confirmed that Grandma Rose was receiving hospice care through Cedarbrook Home Health. I drove there straight away. The lobby smelled like floor cleaner and flowers that were one day past fresh. I walked up to the front desk and gave my name. The woman behind the counter typed something, paused, and looked up at me with practiced sympathy. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Your name isn't on the approved visitor list. I am her granddaughter. Her only granddaughter." "I understand, but the primary contact, a Carol Collins, provided a specific list." My mother had sat down somewhere with a pen and a piece of paper and written a list of every person allowed to see my dying grandmother, and she had left my name off of it. She had done that deliberately, carefully, on purpose. I sat in the parking lot for over an hour with the engine off and my hands on the steering wheel, and at some point I realized they were shaking and I couldn't make them stop. And then I saw her. A woman in scrubs walking out the side entrance. Middle-aged, tired eyes. Canvas tote bag over one shoulder. She reached her car and then stopped. Paused. And she looked across the parking lot directly at me through my windshield and held my gaze for 3 or 4 seconds. Then she turned away and got into her car. I didn't know her name. Not yet. 2 weeks later my phone rang at 7 in the morning. My mother's name on the screen. I let it ring once before I picked up. "Mom passed this morning. Funeral is Thursday. Wear something appropriate." Not "I'm sorry, Sarah." Not "she went peacefully." Not "are you okay, are you sitting down, do you need me to come over?" Just instructions. Instructions and a dress code. I held the phone in my hand and I couldn't cry. I just sat on the edge of my bed in the early morning gray light and felt hollow. Thursday came. The church was half full. Neighbors, book club women, cousins I hadn't seen in years. Grandma's casket sat beneath a spray of white roses my mother had almost certainly chosen for the photographs. And there was Carol center stage, dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief and embracing every single person who walked through those doors. I was with her every single day until the very end, she told Mrs. Gallagher, loud enough for the whole pew to hear. I never left her side. Not once. I stood in the back row. Nobody asked how I was doing. Nobody asked where I had been all these months. They already had Carol's version of the story. Doug passed me on his way to the restroom, didn't look at me, just muttered "Don't cause any trouble today," and kept walking. Then a hand landed on my shoulder. Gentle. Careful. I turned around. It was the woman from the parking lot. Same tired eyes. She was in a dark blouse instead of scrubs, but I recognized her instantly. She leaned close to my ear. "She talked about you every single day." And before I could say a single word, before I could ask her name, she stepped back and disappeared through the side door of the church. Every day. My grandmother had asked about me every single day. 1 week after the funeral, an email arrived from the law office of attorney William Bennett. Estate of Rose M. Harrington. Reading of last will and testament. Friday at 2 o'clock. Please confirm attendance. My phone rang before I had finished reading it. My mother. "You got the email?" "Yes, I just show up and keep quiet." "Why would I need to keep quiet?" A pause. Then flat, final, certain as stone. "Because there's nothing in that will for you, Sarah. I made sure of it." 6 words. That's all it took to confirm everything I had feared for 3 months. She hadn't just taken care of Grandma. She had taken care of the paperwork, too. She had made sure every dollar, every floorboard, every piece of my grandmother's carefully built life was pointed in one direction. Hers. I set the phone down on my kitchen counter and stared at the ceiling. No lawyer. No savings. No recording of that phone call. Just my word against hers. And in this family, my word had never been worth very much. But somewhere underneath the panic, underneath the grief that was pressing on my chest like a stone, I heard Grandma Rose's voice from that September phone call. Thin but certain. I've taken care of it. Friday. I would be there. And I would not keep quiet. Don't go anywhere, because what happens inside that conference room on Friday afternoon is something I will never forget for the rest of my life. Part 3 is right here. And you need to hear what Grandma Rose had been doing from her hospital bed when no one was watching. Thursday night. My apartment was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the sound of my own breathing. I was sitting cross-legged on my bed with a shoebox of photographs, going through them slowly the way you go through something precious when you're not sure you'll ever have the chance again. Grandma and me at the county fair with powdered sugar all over our chins from funnel cake. Both of us completely guilty and completely happy. Grandma teaching me to sew on a button at her kitchen table, my fingers clumsy and frustrated, her hands steady and patient over mine. Grandma at my high school graduation, holding a handmade sign in block letters she had painted herself. "That's my girl," it said. She was wearing her good blue coat and beaming like I had won an Olympic medal. My phone buzzed. "Doug, tomorrow is about respecting your mother's sacrifices. Elaine would be ashamed of you if you made a fuss." I read it twice. Then I set the phone face down on the quilt. Elaine would be ashamed. He actually typed those words. The man who locked me out of her house. The man who stood in that doorway like a bouncer at a club and told me not to cause drama while my grandmother was dying on the other side of the wall. I picked up the photo from the county fair. Grandma Rose is looking at the camera, but her hand is on my shoulder. It's always on my shoulder in every single photograph. Always reaching for me. Always making sure I know she's there. "You have more spine than you think, Sarah Bean." And then her voice from the phone call. "No matter what happens, I've taken care of it." I put the photos back in the box. I set my alarm for 7. I laid out a navy dress, simple and clean, something Grandma would have nodded approvingly at. I didn't know what Friday held. But lying there in the dark, I made a decision, quiet as breathing. I was going to show up. I was going to sit in that chair. And I was not going to let anyone make me feel small. Not tomorrow. Not again. Friday. 1:47 in the afternoon. The law office of William Bennett sat on the second floor of an old brick building on Main Street, right above the hardware store that had been there since the 1940s. I climbed the narrow stairs slowly, each step creaking like it was announcing me to the room above. The conference room was small. Wood-paneled walls. A long oak table. A window that looked out onto the town square where children were chasing pigeons in the afternoon light. The room smelled like old coffee and older paper, the specific smell of decisions made in writing. I was not the first to arrive. Carol was already seated to the left of the head of the table, hair freshly blown out, black dress pressed to perfection, and pearl earrings in her ears. Grandma Rose's pearl earrings. The ones she had worn at her own wedding. Sitting in my mother's earlobes before the will had even been read, like she was already wearing the inheritance. Doug sat beside her with his arms folded and his jaw set. He didn't acknowledge me. Aunt Helen, my mother's younger sister, sat across from them, clutching her handbag in her lap like a life preserver. We made brief eye contact and she gave me a tight, anxious smile. 2 women I recognized from Grandma's church sat near the window. Barbara and Jean, Grandma's closest friends of 40 years. They nodded at me, but there was something behind their eyes. Pity maybe, or something closer to judgment. Carol's funeral performance was still very fresh. At the head of the table sat attorney William Bennett. 60s, silver-haired, reading glasses perched at the very tip of his nose, with the kind of stillness that fills a room without demanding it. In front of him was a document folder, thick, held together with a binder clip. But something caught my eye immediately. The folder wasn't 1 stack. It was 2. The top section was thinner, held with a blue clip. Beneath it, a second section, noticeably thicker, secured with a red one. 2 sections. 2 clips. "Thank you all for being here," Bennett said. "We'll begin in a moment." I took the last empty chair at the far end of the table, alone, with the full length of the oak table between me and my mother. Bennett opened the blue-clipped section and arranged his papers. The room settled into the kind of silence that presses against your ears. And then my mother moved. She leaned toward me. Not casually. Not like someone reaching for a glass of water. She reached across the gap between our chairs and grabbed my wrist. Not my hand. My wrist. Her fingers closed around it like a cuff, and I felt her nails press into the thin skin just above my pulse. She pulled me close. Her perfume was sharp, gardenia and something chemical underneath, the kind of perfume you can still smell in a room an hour after a person has left it. If you get a single penny, she whispered, I will make your life a living hell. Don't test me. Her eyes were flat and steady. The eyes of a person who had rehearsed the thing they were saying until it didn't feel like a threat anymore, just a fact. I didn't pull away. I didn't flinch. I looked straight at her, and for the first time in my entire life I did not look down first. Something had changed inside me. I couldn't name it yet, but it was there, solid and certain. The way the ground feels after a long rain. She released my wrist and straightened in her chair, satisfied. I glanced toward the head of the table. Bennett was watching. He didn't say a word, but his eyes dropped to where Carol's hand had just been, to the white marks from her grip already fading from my skin, and something shifted in his expression. Not surprise. Something quieter. Something like confirmation. Then he opened the folder and began to read. I want to tell you something about what it feels like to sit in a room and listen to someone read away your grandmother's entire life. Page 1 and 2, the family home at 318 Sycamore Street, left to Carol Collins. The house where I learned to walk. The house where Grandma Rose read me stories until we both fell asleep. The house I had stood outside of and begged to enter. Left to Carol. Page 3. Savings accounts totaling $890,000, accumulated over Rose Harrington's entire career as a school librarian, and through decades of careful, patient investment. Left to Carol Collins. Carol shifted in her chair. A small satisfied motion. Page 4. The heirloom jewelry collection. Pieces passed down from Grandma's own mother, including a sapphire ring Grandma had once pressed into my palm on her porch swing, and said, this will be yours on your wedding day, Sarah Bean. Left to Carol Collins. Page 5. Vehicle, furniture, books, and personal effects to be distributed at Carol's discretion. At Carol's discretion. Meaning my mother would decide whether I received a single photograph, a single teacup, a single scrap of the woman who raised me. Carol turned to me. She didn't even try to hide it anymore. The look on her face was pure, open victory. She knew who was there for her, my mother said, just above a whisper. Doug reached over and squeezed her knee. A small celebration. A reward. Aunt Helen looked across the table at me, lips parting slightly like she was about to say something, then dropped her gaze to the tabletop instead. I sat still, hands flat on the table, and inside my head I heard Grandma Rose's voice from September. I've taken care of it. Right then in that moment it sounded like a lie. But then Carol made a mistake. She stood up before Bennett had finished. She dabbed her eyes with a tissue, the same choreographed grief she had performed at the funeral, and she addressed the room like she was accepting an award at a ceremony she had organized herself. I know this is emotional for everyone, she said, but Mom always knew who was truly there for her. I gave up everything. I rearranged my entire life. I was there every morning and every night without fail. She paused and she turned to face me directly. Grace couldn't even bother to visit. Not once in 3 months. My mother died wondering why her own granddaughter had abandoned her. The words hit me exactly the way she meant them to. Like a slap. Because she was using the wall she built between me and Grandma as evidence that I hadn't cared enough to climb it. She had blocked me out, and now she was holding up my absence as proof of my indifference. Barbara shook her head slowly. Jean closed her eyes. Doug straightened. It's true, he said. Sarah didn't show up once. I opened my mouth. But what could I say? They weren't there when I called 11 times. They didn't see me standing on that porch. They didn't sit in that hospice parking lot with shaking hands. All they knew was what Carol had told them. And Carol had been telling stories about me for my entire life. The room felt smaller. Every pair of eyes carried the same quiet accusation. Even Aunt Helen wouldn't look at me now. Carol sat back down and smoothed her dress, reaching up to touch Grandma's pearl earrings like she was adjusting a crown. And I saw it clearly for the first time. This was her masterpiece. She had locked me out, then turned my absence into evidence against me. She had stolen 3 months from me and Grandma, And now she was using those same 3 months to steal my grandmother's memory, too. I pressed my hands flat on the table. They were trembling. I was one breath away from standing up and walking out of that room forever. And then I looked at Bennett. He hadn't moved. He hadn't closed his folder. He hadn't stood up. He was sitting at the head of that table with his hands folded quietly over the documents, and the second section, the one under the red clip, was completely untouched. He was waiting. He had let Carol speak. He had let her finish. He had let the whole room absorb her version of events. And now he was sitting there with something still in front of him, patient as a man who knows what's coming. Carol caught it too. Her eyes moved to the folder and her eyebrows pinched together. Just for a fraction of a second, just a flicker. "Mrs. Collins," Bennett said, his voice as steady as a metronome. "If you're finished, I'd like to continue." Carol laughed, one short syllable, more air than sound. "Oh, is there more?" Bennett removed the red clip. He lifted the second stack of papers and set them squarely in front of him. "There is an amendment to this will," he said. "Filed 3 days before Rose Harrington's death." The room went silent. Not quiet. Silent. The kind of silence where you can hear the clock on the wall, and the pigeons outside on the ledge, and the sound of your own blood moving. Carol's smile dissolved. "What? Do you want to know what Grandma Rose had been doing from her hospital bed with a failing body, a clear mind, and a nurse who believed her? Stay right here. Part 4 is the part that changes everything." Bennett spoke the way a surgeon works. Precise. Unhurried. Not a single word wasted. "In addition to the original will," he said, "Rose Harrington executed a codicil and simultaneously established a separate legal instrument, an irrevocable trust. 3 days before her passing." He let the word sit in the middle of the table like something solid. Irrevocable. For those unfamiliar, he continued, an irrevocable trust, once executed, cannot be revoked, amended, or contested by any party. It exists entirely outside the probate process. Carol's hand shot to the edge of the table. "What trust? I never heard about any trust." Bennett did not respond to her directly. He read, "The trust designates the following assets to be held for the sole benefit of Sarah Rose Collins." He paused just long enough for the room to feel the weight of my middle name. Rose. Grandma's name. She had given it to me when I was born, and I had carried it my whole life without fully understanding what it meant until that exact moment. First, the savings accounts totaling $890,000, to be transferred into the trust in their entirety. Carol's chair scraped back an inch. Second, the residential property at 318 Sycamore Street, title to be transferred to the trust, with Sarah Collins as sole beneficiary. Third, the personal journals of Rose Harrington, 14 volumes spanning 1978 to the week of her death, designated specifically for Sarah Collins. Carol was on her feet. "That's not possible." She was on morphine. She couldn't have signed anything legally. She wasn't in her right mind. Bennett removed his glasses, set them on the table, and looked at her directly for the first time. The amendment was witnessed by a licensed hospice nurse and notarized by a mobile notary public. Rose was assessed as mentally competent by her attending physician on the same day the documents were signed. He replaced his glasses. "The trust is irrevocable. It cannot be contested, altered, or dissolved." Barbara's hand flew to cover her mouth. Jean leaned forward. Aunt Helen went completely still. "Furthermore," Bennett continued, "Rose requested that the witnessing nurse be available to confirm the circumstances of the signing, should any party raise a dispute." He nodded toward the conference room door. It opened, and the woman who walked in was someone I had seen twice before. Once through a windshield in a hospice parking lot, when she had looked across the lot and held my gaze for 4 long seconds. And once at a funeral, when she had put her hand on my shoulder and told me my grandmother talked about me every single day. She sat down in the chair Bennett had placed beside his own. Her name, I learned in the next breath, was Dana Marsh. Nurse Dana. A licensed hospice nurse with Cedarbrook Home Health, assigned to my grandmother for her final 6 weeks. She looked at Carol calmly. Rose was fully alert on the day of signing. She dictated the terms of the trust herself, clearly and without any hesitation. Carol's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Rose told me her daughter had restricted her granddaughter's visits. Nurse Dana continued, her voice steady and quiet. She said her daughter had taken her phone. She told me she had been pressured into signing the original will during a period when she was too weak and too frightened to resist. Jean made a small sound. Barbara turned and stared at Carol. Rose asked me to contact Sarah from my personal phone. That text message you received, that was from me. And she asked me to witness the new documents because she wanted someone outside the family to protect her final wishes. Someone her daughter couldn't pressure or control. The room reshaped itself. I felt it. The way gravity shifts when truth enters a space that has been holding a lie for too long. Barbara and Jean were no longer looking at me with pity. They were looking at Carol. And Carol looked like she had been turned inside out. Bennett opened a slim envelope from inside the folder. Rose included a request, he said, that one specific passage from her final journal be read aloud at this proceeding. He unfolded a photocopied page. I recognized the handwriting immediately. Looping, careful cursive, the same penmanship Grandma used to label every single jar in her pantry. Strawberry jam, 2019. Peach preserves, August. I used to sit at her kitchen table and watch her do it when I was small, the careful loop of each letter. The way she always dotted the lowercase I with a tiny round circle instead of a straight point. Callahan read. My daughter Carol has not allowed Sarah to visit me in over 2 months. She took my phone from the nightstand while I slept. She brought papers and told me I needed to sign them. I was tired. I signed. But I should not have, and I knew it the moment the pen left the paper. The room was so quiet I could hear Aunt Helen breathing. I love my daughter, but I cannot let her take everything from Sarah. Sarah is the only one who ever loved me without wanting something in return. Carol sat down hard. She was confused, she said. She didn't know what she was writing, she didn't know what she was saying, Bennett kept reading. I cannot say goodbye to Sarah Bean in person. Carol won't allow it. So I am saying goodbye this way. And everything I have I leave to her. Not because Carol doesn't deserve love, but because Carol chose money over family. And Sarah never did. Aunt Helen's hand pressed over her mouth. Barbara was crying openly. Jean had turned completely away from Carol. I was crying too. I wasn't even aware of when it started. It was just suddenly there, tears running down my face, and I wasn't ashamed of a single one of them. Not because of the money. Not because of the house. Because my grandmother had fought for me from a bed she couldn't leave. With a pen and a plan and a nurse she trusted, she had said goodbye the only way they allowed her. She couldn't hold my hand. She couldn't sit with me on the porch swing one more time. So she did the next best thing. She built something they couldn't take apart, and she put my name on it, and she made sure it would reach me. Carol's voice came back sharp and shaking. I'll contest this. She was dying. She was medicated. No court will uphold this. I'll find an attorney who will. Bennett folded his hands. Same posture he'd held the entire afternoon. Not a hair out of place. Mrs. Collins. The trust is irrevocable. It was established as a separate legal instrument, independent of the will. It is not subject to probate. Cannot be contested through that process. A licensed physician documented Rose's mental competency on the day of execution. The notarization is valid. The witness is a licensed healthcare professional with no personal connection to the beneficiary. Every sentence landed like a door closing, one after another. Click, click, click. Carol spun toward me. Makeup smudged now, hands shaking, all the careful performance stripped away, and what was underneath was raw and ugly and frightened. You did this. You put her up to this somehow. You've been scheming this whole time. And I spoke. For the first time since I had walked into that room, I opened my mouth and I spoke. I didn't know about any of this until 5 minutes ago. I haven't spoken to Grandma in 3 months, Mom. My voice was steady. I didn't raise it. I didn't need to. You made sure of that. The room held its breath. Rick's arms had uncrossed. He was leaning slightly away from Carol now, like a man who has just realized he's standing next to something structurally unsound. Barbara and Jean said nothing to each other. They didn't need to. Aunt Helen was staring at Carol with an expression I had never seen on her face before. Not sympathy. Not fear. Recognition. Like she was finally seeing something she had been choosing not to look at for years. The story my mother had built her entire life, devoted daughter, ungrateful granddaughter, was falling apart in real time in front of 7 witnesses, and she couldn't lie fast enough to hold it together. Bennett turned to me. Miss Collins, do you have anything you'd like to say? I stood up. I smoothed my dress. Grandma would have wanted me to look composed. I looked around the table. Barbara, Jean, Aunt Helen, Doug, Nurse Dana. Then I looked at my mother. I'm not going to fight with you, Mom. Grandma made her decision and I'm going to honor it the same way I would have honored her if you had let me see her. Carol's jaw tightened. You don't deserve any of it. Maybe, but Grandma thought I did. And her voice is the one that matters in this room. She had no answer for that. Not because she couldn't speak, but because there was nothing left she could say that 7 people in that room would believe. I turned to Bennett. Mr. Bennett, I'd like to accept the trust as written. And I'd like to change the locks on my grandmother's house this week. He nodded once. I'll handle the paperwork. I picked up my bag. I pushed in my chair, because Grandma Rose raised me to leave a room the way I found it. I walked to the door. Behind me, Carol's voice stripped completely raw. You'll regret this. You're a disgrace. I didn't turn around. I didn't respond. I walked through that doorway and down the narrow stairs, past the hardware store, and out into the afternoon sun of a town square where children were still chasing pigeons, and the whole world had absolutely no idea what had just happened in that second-floor conference room. But I knew. And Grandma Rose knew. And that was enough. Part 5 is where I tell you what happened after. What happened to Carol, what happened to the house, and what Grandma Rose left inside those 14 journals that I will carry with me for the rest of my life. Please stay. Small towns have short memories but fast mouths. Within a week, everyone who mattered knew. Not because I told anyone. I didn't say a single word to a single person outside that room. The story walked out of that conference room on 6 pairs of legs and spread like weather across the whole town. Barbara called me on a Sunday afternoon. Her voice thick with something between shame and grief. Sarah, I owe you an apology. At the funeral, the way we all looked at you, we had no idea Carol had kept you away. Your grandmother talked about you constantly. She showed us your cards, the ones you mailed every week. She kept them in a little basket right by her bed. She got them. Grandma Rose got every single card I wrote at that kitchen table on Sunday mornings. She held them. She kept them. I had to sit down on my kitchen floor and just breathe for a minute. Jean called the same afternoon and said almost exactly the same thing. And then added quietly, we told Carol we won't be attending her Christmas gathering this year. Or any year. Aunt Helen drove to my apartment. She stood in my doorway and cried, really cried, the kind of crying that comes from a long time of not letting yourself see something clearly. I should have asked more questions, she said. I knew something was off. Carol was too controlling about the visits, too insistent that everything was fine. But I didn't want to get involved and now You're involved now, I told her. She nodded and she stayed for tea. Through Aunt Helen, I learned that Carol spent the following week calling every estate attorney within 100 miles. Not a single one of them would take the case. An irrevocable trust, properly executed, with physician documentation and an independent witness. There was no angle of attack. Every lawyer told her the same thing in different words. It's done. Doug, I was told, had stopped being particularly supportive. The inheritance he had quietly been counting on had evaporated in a single afternoon. And all that was left was Carol's credit card debt and the second mortgage on their house. The monthly payments had only been manageable because Carol had promised him the inheritance would cover everything. He had built an entire financial plan around money that was never going to be his. Now the arguments were happening every night, loud enough for both neighbors to hear, and Doug had already spoken to an attorney. Not an estate attorney. A divorce attorney. 2 weeks after the reading, my phone rang. Carol. I almost didn't pick up. But something in me knew this was likely the last real conversation we would have for a very long time, and I wanted to walk away from it clean. I wanted to be able to say I had heard her out. Grace, she said. Her voice was different. The sharpness was gone. Now it was soft, pleading, the victim voice I had heard my whole life, usually aimed at other people. This time it was aimed at me. Grace, I'm your mother. You can't shut me out. I took care of Grandma for years. I deserve something from all of this. You deserve to be heard, Mom. I'm listening. What exactly did you do for Grandma in those last 3 months? Silence. You took her phone, I said. My voice was steady. Each sentence was a fact. Not an accusation, not a performance. Just the truth said plainly. You locked her door. You told her neighbors she had moved. You kept me away from her deathbed. And then you stood at her funeral and told a room full of people that I had abandoned her. I did what I had to do. And Grandma did what she had to do. Longer silence. I could hear her breathing, uneven and ragged. I love you, Mom. But I don't trust you. And I'm not going to let you control me the way you controlled her. Don't call me again unless you're ready to be truly honest about what you did. I hung up. That phone call was one of the hardest things I have ever done in my life. Part of me wanted to forgive her right there, to just say, okay, let's start over, to be the daughter who never stops trying, because that had been my whole identity for 28 years. And a quieter part kept asking the same question over and over. Did she ever really love Grandma Rose? Or had it always, from the very beginning, been about what Grandma had? I still don't have an answer to that. I may never have one. Tell me in the comments. And if you've dealt with something similar, share your story. You're not alone. Subscribe for more stories about standing your ground and reclaiming your life. A week later, I got an email from Carol. 5 paragraphs. I'm sorry. I was scared. I was in over my head. I panicked. Can we start over? I read every word. I sat with it for a long time. I thought about Grandma Rose, who loved Carol despite everything, who wrote in her journals that she wondered where Carol's selfishness came from, and whether she herself was partly to blame for it. There is an entry from 2011 that I have read probably a dozen times. It says, Diane learned to take from somewhere, and I'm afraid it might have been from watching me give too much. Even at the very end, even from her bed, she was still reckoning with her own part in the story. I didn't respond to the email, not because I'm cruel, but because at 28 years old I had finally learned something that took me my entire life to understand. Every apology from my mother had always been a door back into her control. And this time I was going to keep the door closed. The first time I opened the door of 318 Sycamore Street with my own key, I stood in the entryway for a full minute and just breathed. The house smelled the way it had always smelled. Lemon polish and old books and something warm underneath that I can only describe as Grandma. Her kitchen still had the yellow curtains with the tiny flowers she had sewn herself. Her armchair still held the shape of her, the cushion worn soft exactly where she sat. The crocheted blanket she kept draped over the back of it was exactly where she had left it. I walked through every room like I was visiting a museum of the very best parts of my childhood. The height marks on the kitchen doorframe where she had measured me every single birthday, the pencil lines getting taller and taller, all the way up to the one from my 18th birthday that said Sarah, almost grown but still mine. The windowsill in the living room where she kept her African violets. The reading nook under the stairs where I used to hide with a flashlight and a library book and feel completely safe from everything. In her bedroom on the shelf beside the window I found them. 14 journals. Dark green covers numbered in her handwriting. 1978 to 2024. 46 years of a woman's interior life, lined up like soldiers standing at attention. I sat down on the floor and opened the last one. The final page had my name written at the top. Sarah Bean. If you're reading this, it means my plan worked. Don't be sad. Be brave. And don't let anyone make you small again. Love always, Grandma Rose. I pressed that journal against my chest and I wept. Not the numb, hollow grief of the funeral. Not the frustrated, helpless tears from the hospice parking lot. These were the tears you cry when someone who loved you reaches across the impossible distance of death and puts their hand on your shoulder one last time. She couldn't say goodbye the way she wanted to, so she wrote it down and trusted that it would find me. It found me. I moved into the Sycamore Street house on a Saturday in January. Aunt Helen helped me carry boxes. The porch railing was loose. The bathroom faucet upstairs dripped. The heating system made a noise like a very large, very confused animal trapped inside the walls. Ha ha ha, but it was mine. It was Grandma's gift to me and I was going to take care of it the way she had taken care of me. I used a portion of the trust to pay off my student loans. $31,000 gone in a single morning. I set up a savings account. I didn't buy a new car. I didn't redecorate. I kept teaching second grade at Millfield Elementary and my students don't know a single thing has changed, and that is exactly how I want it. Every evening I read a few pages of Grandma's journals. She writes about her girlhood in the very house I now live in. About marrying Grandpa, who died before I was born. About raising Carol. And here in these pages things get complicated and honest and heartbreaking in equal measure. She loved Carol fiercely. She writes about it the way you write about something that has always cost you more than you ever anticipated. In one entry from 2009 she writes, Carol learned to take from somewhere. And I'm afraid it might have been from watching me give too much. She was not just protecting me. She was reckoning with her own story. I called Nurse Dana to thank her. We met at a diner on the edge of town, over coffee and pie, and she told me things I will carry with me forever. Your grandmother was the bravest patient I have ever had, Dana said. She planned everything from that bed. The trust, the documents, the timing, the journals. She had me call Mr. Bennett 3 separate times just to make sure every single detail was exactly right. Dana smiled, warm and a little tearful. She smiled the whole time she was planning it. She said she had waited 20 years to make sure you were going to be okay. She wasn't going to let a little thing like dying stop her. That's my Grandma Rose. Fighting with a pen, a smile and a plan nobody saw coming. I used to believe that being a good daughter meant never saying no. I thought silence was loyalty. I thought if I loved hard enough, if I was patient enough, if I made myself small enough, eventually my mother would love me back the same way. Grandma taught me something different. Not through lectures or advice but through what she did from a hospital bed with a failing body and a mind as clear and determined as it had ever been. She taught me that protecting someone you love sometimes means making the hardest choice, even when it costs you everything you wanted it to cost you nothing. I don't hate my mother. I want to be completely honest about that. I don't wish anything bad on her. Some nights I still think about that email. Can we start over? And part of me aches because she is my mother and that doesn't go away, no matter how much you might wish it would on the hard nights. But I have stopped waiting for her to become someone she has never been willing to be. I don't call Carol. She doesn't call me. If that changes someday, it will be because she is ready to be genuinely honest. Not because I caved. I have dinner with Aunt Helen every other week. She is learning to cook Grandma Rose's recipes with tremendous enthusiasm and absolutely no natural ability whatsoever, ha ha ha. And we laugh about it until we're crying, and sometimes we're crying for other reasons too, and that is okay. I stay in touch with Barbara and Jean. I read Grandma's journals slowly, a few pages each evening, because I am not ready for them to end. And I live in the house on Sycamore Street. I fixed the porch railing myself last spring. The faucet still drips. I'll get to it. On warm evenings, when the light is going gold and the neighborhood is settling into quiet, I sit on the porch swing where Grandma Rose used to hold me when I was small and frightened and needed someone to tell me I was going to be okay. And I watch the street go dark. And I feel something I haven't felt in a very long time. Solid ground. I am 28 years old and for the first time in my life I am standing on it. That's my story. I never planned to share it. But if it helps even one person recognize that they are not crazy for wanting to be treated with basic dignity by the people who are supposed to love them, then every single word was worth it. Tell me in the comments. And if you've dealt with something similar, share your story. You are not alone. Subscribe for more stories about standing your ground and reclaiming your life. And if you've ever had someone protect you the way my Grandma Rose protected me, tell me about them. I would love to hear it. I really would. Because people like that deserve to be remembered out loud.